and we should have some portion of the first part. We'll find out when we get to the end. So, hi guys, welcome back. Shut the door so you don't have to stare at that. Take a drink of tea. Okay, so last couple questions in the Q&A. Prefer metal over paper? Yeah, I prefer metal over paper, but I always use paper to test my printing. And so I'm gonna take my headphones off because I got a good mic now. So I always am going to use paper to test my stuff. I'm always going to use paper to print my small metals and to print and test cards way through. So, all right, I think we answered a lot of questions. Put more in the chat, put more in the Q&A by all means, because we're going to have some breaks in between there. I don't think that the recording of the questions was being transcribed during that time. So you'll be able to go back and get those later. Excuse me, you won't necessarily be able to go back and get those later, but you can also just reach out to me on particular questions. To recap how we got here, we lost power for about 30 minutes of the presentation. I did take questions and gave some print demonstrations. There will be a section in some of the other classes I've taught that has the print demonstrations. For you, those of you that have stayed or those of you that went through the interruptions, I'm going to give everybody a free copy of the Topaz class I taught, which is going to be denoise and sharpen. So you'll get a copy of that for your going through this period of time. And then anyone that wants a refund, just feel free to email me and I'm happy to give you a refund. But I'm going to have a lot of good information as we go forward, which is great. Okay. So I think I got most of what I got most of what I need. So let me jump back into this and we're going to look at, okay, so we're going to talk just in brief. These are the first things I had. Print companies I recommended. Here's what I mentioned: Photo Printing Pros, McKenna, Whitewall. They're based out of, it's funny, they're based out of Germany, and they oftentimes will get prints to me faster than Bay Photo when I go there. So they have to go through customs and everything, but they ship worldwide. So if you ever have a client that, hey, I love your prints, but I live in Europe or whatever else, and you're based in Indiana, you can use Whitewall to get your international stuff. The companies I would not recommend. Okay, so here's the other thing. Here's the discovery kits, the fine art papers, which I showed you guys, the different things you can get also from Bay. They have a print sampler. So this print sampler, you can get one of those from them and it'll show the different finish types. So if you're wanting to try and see different metals, you can get a print sampler and it'll be gloss, semi-gloss, matte, satin, and then there's another one I can't always remember. All of these also have evaluation prints. And then there's the fine art print discovery kit from Red River Paper. So those are things to keep in mind. Okay, so companies I would not recommend. Walmart is absolutely horrible. I thought, oh God, these guys are going to be great. They're horrible. Walgreens was even worse. I got this print from Walgreens. The color calibration was so bad. It was tacoed over, like literally completely bent over on the outside. I mean, it was all money back guaranteed. And then the company I couldn't think of earlier was CG Pro Prints. I don't know if they're still around, but this is the company I mentioned. I ordered 10 prints and they came from 6 different places, 6 different packages, major headache versus everything showing up at once from one calibration. So I would not recommend. The fine art one is Lumichrome, and other expensive prints is Nevada Art. They're the ones I mentioned that are going to be very hands-on along with Photo Printing Pros to help understand, hey, these are the tweaks and modifications we should make to your images. You're going to pay a little bit more with Nevada Art, but it'll be worth it if you have a really special print. And then somewhere in between is Costco. So they've gone through a lot of changes. You used to be able to order things in the store. Now you can order things. You should be able to still order them through their website, even though they don't offer it through the store. They might have gone away with that. I've used them in the past for prints. The issue with Costco is they're limited in their sizes. So all of the printers I mentioned earlier can do custom sizes. So I have clients right now, I'm not kidding you. I don't know where it came from. Everybody must have picked up the news and thought I needed to order custom prints. I have clients I usually do 40 by 60s for, and they're doing, I want a 36 by 58. And I'm like, Okay. And I have other clients that are doing very specific sizes. All of the print companies, Bay Photo, McKenna, Photo Printing Pros, they can do very, very custom sizes, because as you start working with clients, they're oftentimes going to have very custom sizes for their places. They're going to have a space that really fits well on a custom size. And so being able to offer those through the things is a good thing all the way through. Okay. So top 10 mistakes in printed images. I'm not going to read these because we're going to go through examples and demonstrations on each one of these as we go through. But these are the top 10 mistakes in printed images. These are the mistakes that I see myself. These are the mistakes that I do myself. But in particular, these are the ones I see either in client work, or like, hey, I'm printing this stuff, will you take a look at it? Or I see it in other artists that are printing their work. And so we're going to look at these kind of as we go through. So not photographing in RAW. So this is not a criminal offense, but is one I highly recommend, and for a couple reasons, and I'll give you a couple demonstrations. So all of us, or most of us as photographers, when we got started, we may not have been capturing in RAW, and maybe we have some good early images we want to go back to and look at later that don't necessarily kind of have what we need or whatever else. So one of the things about RAW that's really, really interesting is what happens from 8-bit all the way up to 16-bit, which is RAW. When we're capturing as a JPEG, and this is a key thing to understand, we're getting 8-bit images. This also means when we convert our images to be printed, or we convert them to JPEG for web, they're going from 16-bit down to 8-bit. And what's happening is we're losing all the different possible color combinations and all these other things within there. So we want to be in 16-bit images all the way through. So one of the things that oftentimes happens, and I'll show you this in Lightroom, is if we are in Lightroom, there is a potential when we send images into Photoshop that you've tweaked and modified your settings, and it's already compressing it down into an 8-bit file when it should still be 16-bit. So I'm going to show you what this looks like, and we're going to talk about what happens if you still have a 8-bit JPEG or whatever else within there. So this is a demonstration and an example of RAW versus JPEG and why it's so crucial. So this image here was taken in the Dolomites. This was back in 2010, way before I was practicing as a quote unquote professional. This is just auto mode with the camera. It's taking and making its own decisions. But what's happening right out of the gates, as you can see within the image, is I have a lot of clipping. I have a lot of brightness going on within the image, even to start. So when I'm starting with a JPEG type image, I don't have as much variation with the white balance. Look, when I warm up my white balance, it's warming up the whole image, not my highlights. When I cool it down, it's cooling down the whole images, not my shadows. So that's a big limitation. The other limitation, as you can see, is as I start to play around with my highlights, I don't have that dynamic range within the image. I can't brighten up my shadows or take them down that much because it's a compressed 8-bit image versus an image like this one. This one I took in Nepal just a couple weeks ago. This is my RAW capture. My data is right here within my kind of flat parts of my histogram. I have a lot of control over my white balance. I can be very, very nuanced within the image. This right here is the number one reason we want to be capturing in RAW format, is because we want that control over our white balance. I'm going to show you the white balance here in a second. The shadows, look how much I can open up these shadow areas kind of down at the right. Look how much I can take down my highlights. I can adjust my whites really significantly, really work around my blacks, make a lot of adjustments. I can do a lot of stuff with my tone curve to really, really work in the particular details I want within the image to get a particular thing to pop out or kind of show within the image. Those are just whites, brights, highlights, shadows to be able to do a kind of before and after of an image, and now itself is going to read significantly different. So that is the number one reason we want to be in RAW format when we go all the way through there. The other thing, of course, Zoom wants to put its bars right where I need to be. Come on, move. Really? Really? There we go. Okay, sorry. Okay, so now we're back. So then the other thing I mentioned to make extra sure, you should be able to see this here, external editing. So we'll talk a little bit about color space later, but you want to make extra sure you're in 16 bits, not 8 bits per component. And then you can set your own color space. We'll talk about that and whatever your preferred file format. So this is really important regardless of what you're doing. So if I'm going to Photoshop or if I'm going to something like Topaz, I want this set up properly. And sometimes people have gone through and made those changes and modifications. The other thing is your resolution, and we'll talk about DPI and PPI, is having a resolution that matches your printer. So when I showed you the Canon printer earlier, that's a 300 DPI printer. So I want to have that resolution matched to the particular printer. I have some slides at the end that'll talk about your print company's resolution. Most of the time, and I say this, the vast majority of the times with these bigger print houses, they have the printer technology that will automatically make the DPI scaling adjustments that are needed. So I don't worry a lot about this. Some people that are on this particular Zoom are more detail oriented or can probably notice things that I don't see or understand this stuff even better than I do. And I would say this is where you can make some of those changes, but there's also other places we can make those changes going forward. So keeping that in mind on the DPI versus, the DPI and also 16-bit will help you a little bit to understand. Okay, so now let's talk about mistake number 2, setting the wrong white balance. Remember what I mentioned to you early on, prints I'm dealing with now that aren't exactly as great, oftentimes are too dark. Early on in my print process, it was because my white balance was wrong. And when you have the wrong white balance, what happens is you're going to start to get a lot of casts. You're going to start to get a lot of inaccuracy in your colors as you post-process all the way through. So how do we set a white balance? What's the best way? And for those of you that have taken classes from me before or part of David Kingham's thing, this is some variation of that. So this one here is my raw capture of that bison. This is what I would consider my final image, post-processed all the way through, done all my sharpening and everything else. But one of the things to keep in mind, so this one, what I'm going for in my setting of it is I want the blues back here, but I want a little bit of that warmth up here. The area that's getting direct sun should be feeling warm and should be more eye-catching. The area that's not getting sun, the area that's back there further within the fog, should be cooler. The cools recede back into that portion of the image. I also want a little bit of warmth on the warm orange parts of the bison itself, but also some of the blues on this part right here. So I'm balancing a lot of different things to be able to get to that point. So how am I balancing those? How am I even getting to that point? So this is my as shot white balance. And you can see this is my raw capture image. And I'll make a couple just quick tweaks and modifications to the image just to kind of give us some baseline settings to kind of operate within here. Look a little bit of my exposure. So now I'm kind of dealing with my as shot. I could cycle through some of the other particular ones. But what happens oftentimes in a scene like this, and I sometimes see, is everybody's like, well, I want to convey the coldness. It was so cold out there. The bison was frosty. So I want it to feel very cold and very cool. Well, what's happening is we're losing that warmth in the foreground. We're losing that warmth on the bison. Well, then we could go the opposite direction. This isn't what that scene felt like. It wasn't a warm and inviting scene. It wasn't very, it wasn't like something you would expect to see in a beach setting or somewhere else. So how do we actually get to that point? So auto white balance oftentimes will get us very close to where we want to be. But if I'm anything like you guys, I'm not perfect on how I see colors. And by not being perfect, I need sometimes a little extra help. And by a little extra help, if I take my vibrance and saturation up to 100, well, I've nuclearized the image, but you can see now it's going to help me to make sure I have that warmth where I want it to be and the coolness in the areas I don't. So as I warm up, what I'm watching for is I don't want the warmth that's in the foreground to start to be going into the background. So as I go back here, I don't want that. but I don't want the coldness that's in the background to be coming up into my foreground or into the bison itself. And so I'm going to find that place, that piece within the image, somewhere probably around here where this area is capturing some of that warmth. We're capturing some of the warmth on the bison, and that's how I'm going to set my white balance. And so as I set my white balance, and then I do my post-processing, whether I'm adding a little bit of vibrance, maybe a little bit of saturation, maybe a little bit of texture, clarity, whatever else I'm going to do to the image to be able to get what I want, well, I have the correct. So it should be accurately reflecting. So in a situation like this, I should be accurately reflecting as I go forward with the image. So this is my final image, and you can see whether it's right or wrong in terms of the artistic intent. Maybe you could say, well, your colors are a little bit off, or you have a little bit of whatever else. My artistic intent is intact here, and the accuracy of my colors and the warmth and the cools are accurate as I go forward with the image. I still have the frostiness on the face. I still have some of the warmth on the hump. I still have the warm in this area right here, and that comes from setting that white balance correctly. So if I didn't set my white balance correctly, and as I process through this image, it would have a lot of color cast. It would have a lot of inaccurate things where an area that should be cool is going to be warm, or an area that should be warm is going to be cool. So keeping that in mind is really going to help us as we go through the image. So that's mistake number 2, setting the wrong white balance. Now let's talk about your print is too dark or too bright. So I showed you on the video of this one that's actually behind me. Let's take a look at what this one actually looks like within the image. Not this one here, but this one here. So is it too dark? Now, it looks pretty bright on the screen, but I know from past experience, it's going to come out too dark. So there's some things I can possibly do within the image right now to help it. I can open up my shadows a little bit more. I could possibly take up my whites a little bit, but look at this. As soon as I start taking my whites up, I start clipping my sky. So for those of you that don't use Lightroom a lot or are new in the process or whatever else, the J key will turn on your clipping monitors. So you can see now red means I'm going to be way too bright in my image. And then anything that's blue is going to be way too dark. And so this is going to give us good inclinations. And what that is telling us is anything that is clipping is going to print pure white. There's going to be no detail in that. Anything that's clipping dark, well, same thing. It's going to print pure black. The printer is going to print out pure black. And that pure black portion is going to be no detail or whatever else. And so sometimes it doesn't matter. We can be okay with parts and pieces of this area printing pure black because it is really black. But rarely am I going to want anything that's too bright printing within the sky. Even this is possibly just a little bit too bright, but we're going to have to adjust some things down with our highlights or whatever else within that scene to be able to get the scene the way we want it. So that's one thing to keep in mind. These are the preliminary checks. But how do we actually brighten the image for printing? So I'm going to go through at the tail end, I'm going to go through my start to finish workflow of a print. But I want to show you right now, for those of you that want to stick around, can't stick around to the end or want to know just this particular thing, and also because it's important enough to show more than once on how we do this. So I'm going to go edit, right click, edit in Photoshop. And so I'll pull up edit accompany with Lightroom adjustments. It'll take a second because Photoshop crashed when we lost power. It's rebooting, so give it one quick second. I'll take a water. Okay, so we have our image here. I'm going to move zoom out of the way again. Move this out of the way again. All right, so we got our image here. Looks pretty good. I got that detail up there within the sky, a lot of the colors, everything else I want. I can tell you from experience, this is all going to print out too dark. So what do I do? So we're going to go in. We're going to duplicate the layer. We always want to start with duplicating our layer. A, we can see what changes. B, we'll need it oftentimes when we do things going backwards. Then we're going to go in, and this is all covered in the workflow. This is written out in the workflow. So when I do the workflow later, I'll show it to you then. But this is how we brighten up the darker parts. We're going to switch the blend mode to screen. and it's going to make everything look much brighter. And you're going to say, wow, Nick, that looks like crap. And I'm going to say, yes, it does, but I'm not done. So then we're going to come over here, and I'm actually going to turn this enable cursor on so you can see a little bit more. So if I do the zoom, you can see this little selection button right here, load channel as selection. So we're going to load the channel. And what it's doing is targeting the bright pixels within the image. So it's targeting the brightest pixels. We've turned that mode to screen. Now it's targeting the brightest pixels. So we want it to target the brightest pixels. And then what we're going to do is go up here to select inverse. And we've inverted that selection. So now it's targeting everything that's not the bright pixels, which is what we want. So we're targeting the brights, and then we're flipping it and saying, no, actually we want to deal with the blacks. And then we're going to add down here, we're going to add a mask. And this is all detailed in here. So now we have a mask that's on here. So there's our with no layer. This is our screen layer right here. And you can see, even in this, we're not targeting right now the brighter parts of the image. Like, look at this image before. Now look at it after. You can see, and I'll zoom in just on this part. This before and after is not targeting those bright pixels within the image. The rest of the image is getting brighter, but not the bright pixels within that scene. And that's what we want. This in itself is too bright. We get a little bit washed out. So now we adjust our opacity kind of to taste. And so if we go all the way down, that's no effect at all the way up to 100%. And I can tell you from experience, and I have this on the thing, about 40 to 60% is typically going to be the right amount. And so that's at 54%. As I turn that layer off and on, you can see my sky doesn't change at all. My sky is completely the same in the dark image as it is in the brighter image, which is what I want. What does change, though, are these details, these cacti, these ocotillos, this particular bush right here, et cetera, et cetera. And that is now going to print out in a better fashion as we go forward. So now we've brightened up the darker part of the image to be able to print it correctly. There's a couple more steps, and I can just show them to you real quick, and we'll go through them again on a different image from scratch. But we're also going to go through and we're going to add some contrast. So we're just going to pull up a brightness contrast layer. And of course, it's not going to cooperate. Why? Oh, interesting. They've now changed that to the point where it's not showing up. Come on. There we go. So what happens with an image, whenever you print it, it's going to come out darker than it looks like on your screen. It's going to have less contrast, and it's going to be a little less vibrant. So I add between 10 and 15 points of contrast. This is a global contrast adjustment, and that's going to increase the contrast within the image. So some of that brightening we did a minute ago kind of took out some of that contrast. And so it's very subtle. You may not even be able to see it on the zoom, but it's added some of that contrast back to help the image. And then the next thing I do is I add some vibrance, and it's going to be about the same. So an image is going to come out less bright, less vibrant, and less contrast. And so I add a little bit of vibrance into the image, typically around the same thing, 10 to 15. And I'll turn that layer off and on to be able to take a look. So this, from our start to finish, excuse me. No, I don't want to export this right now. Come on. Really? Photoshop, you're really going to do this to me right now? There we go. Okay. So if we look at, we stamp the layer, and we look at our, where we started. So this is where we started to where we ended up. And so I didn't brighten my sky, but I brightened up my shadows and some of the other details, added enough contrast and vibrance to make it look good. This one's ready to print right now. So that's the mistake number 2, or number 3. Your print is too dark or too bright. So we're correcting it by checking it when we're in Lightroom, and then we're brightening it up when we're in there within Photoshop. So I'm going to pause for a second and check the questions, take a drink of water, and then we'll go back to it Please go full screen. I can't completely go full screen. I can try actually though. So there's my full screen there. So that'll help a little bit. So a couple questions. So that one was in there. I answered that one. You seem to save in TIFF, not PDF. It's not PDF, it's PSD. I save in TIFF file format because that's what works better with any external photo editors I'm going to use. So if I'm going to go into a file into something like Sharpen or Topaz or whatever, or Nik collection, it works better with TIFF files. And then the other reason is just in terms of the printer I use, they like TIFF files versus PSDs. I don't find a particular preference between the two. So that was one question there. I was under the impression that white balance setting didn't matter for RAW. It doesn't matter in the field. Good question on that one. So when you set the white balance in the field, it doesn't matter, but it oftentimes gets you closer. And then you can always tweak and modify it later. So good question. Yep, you corrected that one. So Costco is no longer offering photo services. I believe they sold their clients to Shutterfly. Good to know. Thanks, Joel. So for those on Costco, that's the answer within there. So, okay. So, yes, John asked, could I have brightened my image for print using a TK luminosity mask? And the answer is absolutely yes. But I also know not everybody on here has done a lot of time on TK, but that's the way you can build your own masks without that. So, yeah, that's a good question. All right. A couple more questions and then we'll get back into it. These are good questions. What app do I use for printing? I use Print Studio Pro is the app I use for printing. It's part of the Canon family or part of the Canon process. And I can pull it up and adjust my prints and everything else based on paper size, what the type is, whether it's a matte or a glossy, and what I want. I do not recommend printing directly out of the Photoshop module. It's absolutely horrible. The Print Studio Pro is pretty good, so which is good. And this question I knew was going to come up. Bernard asked, what about Lightroom luminosity mask for Brighten? You can start to use that a little bit. It's something to consider. So let's say we wanted to take this image here and we wanted to do it in Lightroom. We can. It's not going to be quite as granular in some of the other adjustments, but you could do a local adjustment. And I'm actually not going to go into that today. Anybody that wants to know more about local adjustments, I'll give you a discount on the Michael Fry class from January. It was absolutely fantastic, but there is some ways we could do a linear gradient, or excuse me, even a range adjustment by selecting an actual luminance range. But you can see it's going to be targeting more than just some of the other stuff. I've played around with it a little bit, and I can tell you I haven't gotten the results that I want or can control as much within Photoshop. But you could, if you're really good with your local adjustments or your range mask adjustments, do what I just showed, probably within Lightroom. So yes, good question in that regard. Okay, so there's a couple. Oh, so John asked, so the brightness, contrast, and vibrance layers aren't clipped to the duplicate layer. No, they aren't clipped to. They're just a layer on top of that duplicate. So going back into Photoshop, John's question, they're not clipped to that actual layer that's down there. When I stamped the layer on the top, that made everything, it locked in everything that was below that. So whenever you stamp a layer, it's going to lock in everything below. So Command Option Shift E or Windows Alt Shift is going to stamp a layer. So now we actually have a layer. So anytime you stamp a layer, it basically locks in everything you've done below within the image. Good. All right, so let's okay, 2 last questions and then we're going back in. Canon versus Epson, including print app. I started with a Canon printer. I'm a Nikon photographer, but I haven't tried Epsons. I know they're pretty good. Ideally, I would have an Epson and be able to give you a basis of comparison in terms of what they use. I know people that have Epsons that are super happy. I know people that have Canons that are super happy. I would definitely say those are the 2 leading printer companies. So a printing program for Epson, I don't know. If you do know, if anyone on here uses an Epson and has a good printing program that they like, please put it in the chat. And it would super be helpful. So all the way through. Okay, so let's look at number 4 mistake. Not calibrating your monitor. Hey, we already talked about the monitor calibration. Here's one of the links you'll get to be able to go to Amazon. Like I said, they're 139 bucks. The other thing I can tell you is if you're part of a camera club, oftentimes camera clubs will buy these and rent them out to their local people. The other thing you can sometimes do, speaking from experience, is contact one of your local pros and ask them, hey, for 20 bucks, can I borrow your calibrator? And I've rented mine out a few times over the years to people. So if you're in San Luis Obispo, come on ahead and borrow mine. But you can also ask that, or you could probably even get a couple of the photographer friends to say, hey, should we have a calibrator to take a look at it? Why do we want a calibrator? Why is it so crucial? I can't say enough good things about it. So the biggest things, and you won't be able to see these until you go through, is you can show your calibrated and your uncalibrated views when you do your calibration. And you will really notice, even in any monitor that's straight out of the box, there needs to be calibration that's specifically done for your room, your space, your whatever else. And the calibration can shift as the monitors come out. Calibration will shift based on the color temperature of your computer versus the color temperature of the one when they tested it straight off the line. Brand new monitors always need to be calibrated, and can say they really make a big difference. And the biggest reason is for things like the greens. And why the greens? Okay, so now we're going to get a little dorky or techie for the next few minutes. And as we do that, the big part of what we're going for is talking about gamut. And you're going to hear people talk a lot when they talk about printing and about monitors. They're going to talk about gamut, and that is the complete range of colors. So that complete range of colors is all the things we're going to see out there on our monitors and whatever else. And what we have is a disproportionate amount of greens. So we have green, we have bluish green, we have blue green, we have yellow green, we have greenish yellow as well. And that makes up a huge portion of the gamut that we're dealing with. And so our ability as humans, we can discern a huge amount of the variations within the natural environment of greens, the different types of shades of green, the different variations and how it looks. If you look at a tree, if you look at the grass, whatever else, our monitors aren't necessarily as good. And this is where we get into color space and what we want to possibly set for color space. So for me, when I set my displays gamut, this gets you to set it. You're going to see this is the gamut, and this is what is represented by the different color space. And we'll talk about this and what color space you want to use. So sRGB, Adobe RGB are the big ones. And we also have ProPhoto RGB, which is the P3 one that's actually right here. And so you're going to want to set these based on what you're doing and what you're printing, which is going to be determined by the color gamut of our device. So remember that chart I showed you back here? This one right here, the gamut all the way through, kind of that thing where the colors resonate or where they fall. Well, when we look at our gamuts of our devices, this is the horseshoe shape of visible color. This is that thing right here. And these are the three major color spaces you're going to be able to set within Lightroom, within Photoshop, with how you export your images as well. ProPhoto is going to have the biggest level of gamut, but it's not necessarily covering more of those core colors. It's covering much further out on the chromaticity diagram, or that big horseshoe all the way through. So for me, I use ProPhoto just because I want to keep everything colored, not necessarily because that's what it needs to look like at the end. And the reason I say at the end is this. sRGB, this color space, is what our devices and web things display. Our phones are sRGB color space. Our computer, when we look at somebody's website, is going to be displaying an sRGB. So if you've ever had an instance where you had an image and you exported it out and then you sent it to somebody and you looked at it on their phone and it didn't look anything like it looked like on your computer, it's probably because of the color space inconsistency. And I can tell you, I always am converting to sRGB when it's going out there for web, or I'm emailing a picture, or I'm sending it to someone via text, because that's what our devices display. And the reason it's key to understand is ProPhoto, everything for sRGB fits inside of that color space. So basically we're going to be working at the fringes, and then as we get down into sRGB, it's all contained within that area. Same thing with Adobe. Aside from this little teeny kind of portion over here, everything's going to be within that Adobe RGB color space. So if we're working at the biggest color space as we're processing, and then we're exporting it down, well, now we're going to make sure everything is included in there. Versus if you're in sRGB and you want to expand that gamut range, you're not going to be able to do so and get up into the ProPhotos or the Adobe portions of things. So this is a very complex thing to try to explain. You can do more reading on it, but the thing I would tell you is try to start with as much as you can, and then always be converting into sRGB when you go out there, or matte paper. So you can see the matte paper outline, which is this portion right here, aligns very closely with sRGB. So our printed images should oftentimes look very similar to that. So color space, I know people are going to have more questions about it. We can take more at the end. I'm not a be-all, end-all expert. I just know from lots of experience that ProPhoto works well for me. I can make those little tiny subtle things I oftentimes can't even see, but then sRGB is like all the way through the end. So setting a color profile. So we'll go over here into Photoshop. Here's how you do it. You go to Edit, Convert to Profile, and then you can make all of your changes right here. So let's take a look at Photoshop. I'll go full screen. Edit. Where did they move it? They didn't move it. I just showed it. What the heck? There it is. Convert to profile. Sorry, they switched things around a little bit. So this is where we convert to profile. So this one's already in an sRGB profile because I've already converted it for web. I've already sharpened it. I've already sized it all the way through. But then you can take a closer look at them and make any of the other decisions and determinations you want to make. So this, going back to the earlier question that was asked, so I have my color profiles for my monitors built in here. I have a color profile for one of my printers. I can't find it. The print companies I use, maybe it's not on this computer, or whatever else. Paper color profiles. So as you start printing on specific papers, a lot of times you can get printing profiles from Red River or Bayphoto or whatever else to be able to have the particular print profile all the way through. This stuff gets very technical as you go down through, but this is how you get everything into that technical space within there. So that's how you convert it to a particular profile. You can reference that back later. Okay. Next thing is not cropping correctly, or understanding print profile settings. So common starting sizes for all prints. Most digital cameras today are taking and capturing images, not all, but most are in a 2:3 format. That's what we're getting our raw photos straight out of our camera as, is a 2:3, which means the native resolution of a 2:3, as we take our math up, and you'll get this chart, is a 24:36. So as you're thinking about what you're printing, what sizes you can be printing in, be thinking a little bit about this conversion. And the conversion goes into 30:40. These are my three most popular print sizes: 30:40, 20:30, and 24:36. Does that mean you can make changes and modifications and tweaks and everything else? Yes, you can. But thinking about, if I'm putting something into a 4:5 crop, that means potentially if I want to print it larger, these are my kind of size limitations. A 5:7 is going to be this, a 4:6 is going to be this all the way through. So helping to understand that as you go forward helps you as you look at your cropping. So let's look at some cropping. let's look at this image here. So this image is kind of funny in a lot of perspectives. Not the fact that the boat crashed, but I have sold this. This image has the designation that I probably don't have of a lot of prints, that I've sold this in 4 completely different crops. And that's part of understanding where and how it lays out. So I've sold this. To get into crop, you hit R, and that'll pull up your cropping functionality. And it has the presets all the way down through here, right? So you can have your 4x5 crops. You can see what that would look like. 8.5 by 11, 5 by 7, 2 by 3, which is the original crop or potentially original crop, all the way down through. So I've sold this as a 20 by 30 horizontal. I've also sold this, interestingly enough, as a vertical print. So as we go down through it, oops, not flipping for me. I can flip it down through. I've sold it as a vertical print. So somebody that wanted to fit a vertical space. Reads lays out completely differently, which is kind of interesting. I've also been selling this print recently as a 1x3 orientation. This is kind of an iconic thing here on the coast. But now we have the boat itself kind of going all the way down through the image or whatever else, which is kind of interesting. And then if we, do it again, we can also sell this one or consider this print or have this print as a 24, which is a 1:3 basically. 24 by 8. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Actually, I want to do 8 by 24, sorry. So I'll do a 1:3 ratio. So these are where you can do your custom ratios. 3 by 1, sorry. I always forget my ratios sometimes. Okay, so this is the, oh, why is it not letting me do a 3 by 1? Well, this is where Lightroom gets a little bit different than Photoshop. So anyways, so this is understanding the crop ratios within there and what you're, come on, reset back, within your image and what you're working with. The other things to consider, so let's take this into Photoshop, not that, reset. I don't like, if you can't tell, I don't like Lightroom's crop tool as much as Photoshop. So if we go into Photoshop, edit in, Photoshop all the way through. So R is the shortcut in Lightroom, and then C is our shortcut in Photoshop. And so now we can play around with different ratios. We can do things like warp. We can do things like moving the image in just every so much. So if we go into C here, then I have different crop ratios built into here. And so this now I can do that 1:3 I was trying to do in Lightroom and I couldn't. So now I have a 1:3 vertical. Well, let's say I have this 1:3 vertical, and this is understanding a little bit about the ratios and the programs and how we get things to work kind of all the way through. So let me move. I'm not putting zoom in good places today. Now we can also play around ever so slightly with even in that ratio itself. Like if I need just a little bit more of that space, now I can move in just a little bit more of that outside thing to fit that particular ratio. So for example, if I, the regular 1:3 feels a little compressed right there, well, I can kind of move in a small portion of it to be able to get that 1:3 ratio that I want. Well, now that I have that 1:3 ratio, now you're going to say, well, I have this bottom thing down here. Well, now I can kind of warp down the bottom a little bit like that. Or I could even, if I don't want to change anything there, I could do something like a lasso down at the bottom and go up to edit, content aware fill. It'll look at the rest of the space around there. I'll hit OK. And you can see it's now filled in that bottom portion just fine to be able to do that. So understanding the aspect ratio or the ratio you want with your image in the final destination, there's a couple ways to kind of tweak and modify the image to be able to get to where you want it to be. So that's how you would slightly adjust the image to be able to have. let's say there's another instance where a client wants, or you really want to print this thing as a, let's see, what do we have right now? So the image right now is a 24 by 30. And so I want to now print this image as the client wants, or I want to print it as a 28 by 24. So oftentimes you people would sit here and say, well, I need to crop this image down. I need to do a 2.8 by 2.4 ratio, which is basically a 1.2. The other option is simply to image size this to what I want. So if I know I want a 28 by 24, I can do a 28 by 24, and you can see that very subtle change in the image. So there's the redo of the size. So now it becomes just a little bit more compressed, but now it fits that exact size dimension that I want or what I need. So you can crop the image. We could be cropping back, and we could crop off. We go to exactly a 28 by 30, 28 by 24. So we could crop it to exactly 28 by 24, which sometimes works, or we could do that resize to be able to pull that particular thing in. So as we get further along and you have specific sizes or crops you need to do, the options we have, which I just showed you, one, they can drag out the image after we've cropped it in a little bit, kind of move things around just ever so slightly. Two, we can resize the image into exactly what we want. It might compress things a little more. Or three, we can actually crop things all the way down. So understanding your crop ratios, understanding your options is going to dictate a little bit of how you can work final prints all the way through. So that's another thing, another mistake I see is people think, oh gosh, I want this thing to be a particular size or orientation, and you may not be able to get there. So understanding how you can go there with your ratios is going to be really helpful as we go through. Okay. Keep rolling. Not correctly resizing our prints is another one. So there's a lot of information that's going to come at you in this that you're going to want to reference later. I'll show you resizing of a print as we get into the demonstration. The big thing on the resizing is we have options. So Adobe Super Resolution exists within Lightroom and Camera Raw. So you can use Adobe Super Resolution to resize your image for prints. There's Gigapixel AI from Topaz. I have not had good success. I did a test on this image, went through all of the sizing algorithms, went through all these different programs to resize my image to what I wanted. And the winner, surprisingly, was Photoshop Image Resizer. So I'll show you how to resize the image when we get there. This is a technical thing that it's good to have to reference back to later in terms of what the different resize things do within Photoshop. I'm not going to go through it in great detail. You can read it later because you get the slides and everything else, but it's good to know what they do. I use, to resize my images, which is here, Preserve Details 2.0. I tested it. It's been tested by a lot of other photographers that print a lot, and it does the best job to resize your image and preserve those details all the way through. It's stood up kind of those tested times all the way through. So that's resizing the image. I'll demonstrate that when I do the full print workflow, and then we go through. Okay, so what are their ideal settings for web displays images? There's a couple key things in here. PPI doesn't, I've got to actually switch cameras real quick so I can read this a little better. So PPI doesn't matter in terms of how they're displayed or how they load. What's more important is to resize the pixel width for landscape or pixel height for portrait type images. And landscape is in flat, portrait is in vertical. And if you resize to 72 PPI, it prevents it from being printed at a larger size if the image is stolen. So I put that in mind, and I keep telling people to do that. It will help a little bit in terms of how they load and how they display. So here's what I do to web sharpen or get my images ready for print. So let me show you within, so say this is my image I want to go on the web. TK, the Tony Kuiper things, have a web sharpen tool right here built up. So you just hit the web sharpen. You tell it exactly what height or width parameters you want. what resolutions you potentially want. So I actually still have it at 300 DPI because it downsizes my image. And then you hit either whether you want it to vertically or horizontally fit these particular pixel dimensions. And so if I hit horizontal, it's going to resize the image smaller, as you can see. So it's now that 20 by 30 image is now 6 inches by 5 by 6 inches essentially. So it's going to load better. It's a smaller image size. It's now sharpened it for web. I have it put my little signature right there on the bottom. You can see like before or after. Now I can just simply save it for web as a JPEG. It's converted it to sRGB for me, or it will convert it to sRGB when I export or save for web out of here. Remember I mentioned always needing to save those for web or into sRGB. So that's how you could do it out of Photoshop. In Lightroom, we can do it directly out of here as well. So right click, and then we're going to go down to export, and we're going to hit export here. You're going to want to change it into sRGB. So these are the color space settings. So always change it into there. You can resize it to fit right here if you want to adjust to that pixel size. So long edge, remember I mentioned, so we had, going back to the thing, 1920. So the long edge would then be 1920. Just put 1920 in here. If you wanted to do any sharpening or add your watermark, so I don't have any watermarks loaded, I didn't do anything out of here, and then do any output sharpening for screen or any type of paper as well. So you can do that directly out of Lightroom, and it'll convert it into an sRGB and export it out as well. So that's how to do it out of the two programs. So web display, those are the ideal displays there. So that's a good one to keep in mind. All right, so mistake number 7. Take a drink of water real quick, sorry. Under or over sharpening our images. This is another big mistake we make, and I'll take another pause for questions after this one. We got some other ones coming in, and then we'll talk about this one. So under or over sharpening our images. So we can over sharpen our images, and we also can oftentimes under sharpen our images. So let's talk about it. So sharpening here, this is an image from Glacier National Park a couple years ago. And what I teach on my sharpening technique is this is why I like to use Photoshop. I don't have it do the pre-sharpening within Lightroom. You can use it if all you're using is Lightroom, but you want to adjust your sharpening down here within Lightroom. So the things we have amount, we have radius, and we have detail. So radius, this is when we're low, it's going to be sharpening the smaller details more. When it's high, it's going to be sharpening the bigger details more. So you can see probably on my screen how that's starting to change within the image. So radius on landscape images is almost always going to be very, very low, the lowest amount. The other thing we want to control or take a look at, so we want to be zoomed in to 100% when we do our sharpening. And we want to adjust the detail as well. And so when we adjust the detail, so if we take our radius up and then we hold down the Option key as we adjust our detail, you can see on our detail, sorry, I'm going to zoom into 300 just so you can see it better. You can see when we hold down the Option key what it's actually impacting or affecting for the detail. So this is showing the mask that Lightroom is actually doing to sharpen within there. And so you can see this is going to be a very, very strong sharpen. It's starting to make it look almost glassy within the image. And so if we go all the way down to the 0 or 0.5 radius, you can see this is how it's impacting the image. As we come up higher, you're seeing it sharpening more and more of those details in a greater level. And that's not what we want, because that's going to feel very, very crispy, especially around these edges. You can see we're starting to get a lot of haloing. We're starting to get a lot of other kind of artifacting within there. So I'm always going to be super low on the radius, and I'm also going to be super low on the amount. But the other thing we can do or take a look at is the masking. So if we hold down the alter option, we're controlling what's sharpening. So this is sharpening everything uniformly. And when we're sharpening in images, we want to be sharpening the edges and the details in particular. This is barely sharpening anything. So as we adjust our mask, we want it to be sharpening. Now you can see we're sharpening some of these ridge details, some of the peak details, these other parts and pieces within the image in such a way that it's going to be bringing that out. So masking a high number right there. And then we can also adjust the amount. How much stronger is it going to do? And I typically I'll have my amount about equal to the megapixels of my camera. So somewhere around 40 megapixels is the actual amount I'm going to be doing within there. So this is a pre-sharpening of the image before I take it over into Photoshop. And as the final step of the print sharpening, I'll show you when we prepare it for print, we're going to do the final sharpening within the image. But we want to make sure to adjust our pre-sharpening, or what's called deconvolution sharpening, before we do the final sizing of our image, because it definitely will make a difference. If you're not doing any sharpening at all or over sharpening, it's going to make a big difference as we get further over into the process. So now let's go into Photoshop. Let's say we've done all of our other edits. We'll do a couple other tweaks or modifications to kind of get the image where we potentially want it to be. Actually add a little haze, vibrance and saturation, calibration to 100. Yeah, we're looking good. All right. Actually, no, a little too rich on the black, so I'm gonna back off there. Add a little more black. Trying to get it to somewhat of a point that I like it. There we go. Now it's showing that. All right, so now we're going to go over into Photoshop. And pulling up Photoshop. There we go. All right. So let's see. Pulling up Photoshop here. So now we have the image in Photoshop. We've done all of our other, say we have more edits to do or whatever else here. Well, now we need to figure out the two things. We talked about this a second ago. What's our crop and what's our image size? So how do I like the cropping? What do I think about the cropping? What do I think about the lines? What about the structure? What about the flow? Where am I distracted? What am I not distracted by, etc.? And so maybe I know the answer right away. Like, this looks good. I'm going to keep it. This is a 2:3 crop ratio, I'm imagining, because that's what I capture as my native resolution. Exactly a 2:3. So what does a 5:7 look like? Well, I lose a little bit of the top, lose a little bit of the bottom. What does a 4:5 look like? I lose more of the top, more of the bottom. But maybe I know I want to print this as a 16:20 print. And so as a 16:20, that's going to be a good size, something like that. Keeping equal ratio, keeping some space around the mountain up there. This is just an example. Keeping some of that line down here at the bottom. This is starting to work as a 4:5, 8:10, 16:20. See, 4:5, 8:10. Well, now 4:5. Multiply that times 2 again. That's a 16:20. Multiply that again. We're looking at a 24:30 as a potential size. So let's just say we know that's the ratio, that's the crop we like. So now we're at an 8:10. I know I want this image to now be a 16:20. So I go up here to image, and this is covered in the workflow, but it's one of the things I want to show again. Image size. So width is 16. Height is 20. One of the things that happens sometimes, and I'll just cancel out of this and do this again for people that becomes frustrating, is this little link box is checked. So I'll type in 16, and sometimes it'll automatically do our calculations because it knows our ratio correctly. But sometimes it won't know the ratio. Sometimes we won't have our crop exactly the way we want it, or a weird size. So if you're not getting the results you want, if it's populating down here, you can always disconnect the two and be able to put them together. But 16:20, remember when I mentioned the sharpening samples? This is the one we want to do, preserve details 2.0. It's going to make a slightly larger image size, and we hit OK. It's going to increase the pixels just a little bit. Photoshop's going to get in there, work its magic, kind of take a look. Now we have a 16:20 image. Well, what happened is we brought the image over from Lightroom as one size, and now it's in Photoshop and we have a different size. So they're going to want to sharpen the image. And there's all kinds of different ways to sharpen. I can tell you after lots of trial and error, the one that works the best is I'm going to demonstrate now, which is called a, I'm blanking on the name of it, high pass. So I'll show you how to do a high pass. So first thing, we always duplicate our layers. The next thing is we convert it into a smart object. So I use the TK stuff to do it, but we can also just right click on the layer, convert to smart object. And when we convert it to a smart object, it's going to deal with the pixels in a different way than if it was not. And it's going to allow us to do this blending mode in a way that's going to really help us to fine tune our sharpening. And then we change the blending mode to soft light. This looks wrong. Don't worry, we're not done. We go up to filter, other, high pass. And so it's going to pull up this filter as we go through. And we can zoom in and we can take a look at it. We can turn the layer. Oh, sorry, we can't turn the layer off and on. That's right. But we can zoom around the edges of the image and we can see what the pixels are doing or not doing. So if we come up to a place like this, you can see we're getting a ton of haloing at a super high pixel rate versus something around a 4 pixel. Well, we're not getting any sort of haloing. Then we can just kind of spot check a couple other detail areas and take a look at them. We can see we're sharpening those rocks in such a way. Coming down through here, we're looking at the screen right here. It's bringing in the details we want, preserving a lot of that stuff. And I typically, once again, I'm going to be between 3 and 5 pixels to be able to sharpen. And we hit OK. And now we've sharpened that image all the way through to the end. And so we can zoom in and turn that layer off and on. If we've done too much or too little, we're going to be able to tell. And you can see pretty on the zoom in particular, we did a good job sharpening. So if I'm looking at the details of these rocks or other things, you know, I turn that layer off and on and we're at 450%. You can see them start to show up a lot more. It doesn't have the soft look. It's not feeling crispy or punchy, and that's part of the sharpening portion of the image. So that's the over or under sharpening within the image. All right, I'm gonna take a couple questions, take a drink of water, and then we're gonna look at the last couple things. Certainly take more questions, and then we're gonna jump into the last portion of it. It's gonna be the demonstration all the way through. So, okay, so John asked, when using the P3 color space, are you concerned that your printer is able to reproduce that color range? I'm not concerned it's gonna reproduce that color range. I just know that I'm gonna have it covered in terms of what I need. So it's going to be able to be on the screen. I'm not going to have green colors that are way out of whack or whatever else. I'm going to be bringing things back down into the normal space within there. This is why we do test prints as well. But I can say with Adobe Pro Photo, I haven't had any issues that they turn out significantly different than that particular color space, which is good. Okay, do you export to print companies keeping Pro Photo or convert to something else? Good question, Gary. This I put in as kind of a reference slide. Not that one, this one here. And then each one of these printers will have what they want in terms of the print. So this is what Bay Photo uses, for example. 8-bit RGB files, JPEGs, TIFF, PNGs, but JPEGs preferred. And then this is the color space they want. They want either Adobe or sRGB, and this gives you information. So each printer will be able to give you the specifics on what they want to use. So yeah, so most of them, these guys don't want Pro Photo, and they say all the colors within large gamuts such as Pro Photo RGB. So knowing what print gamut the printer will use will dictate a little bit of that all the way through. Why do I not like to sharpen on the iMac? Is the resolution too high on that display? Yeah. So I was showing on the iMac, it shows a lot better than it actually sometimes will replicate. I've learned how to work with it to know that it's over sharpening and over enhancing a little bit. So if it looks too dialed up on my iMac, then I know I have a serious issue all the way through. So, which is, somebody asked, can they delete the screen of me talking? No offense. Yeah, I think you could actually right click over there and then drag the size of the screen to be small, and you can make me teeny tiny over there. I'm not offended at all about that. So Jerry asked, can you make me smaller? And the answer is yes. You should be able to drag the zoom portion over to the right-hand side and make me smaller, and I don't get offended. Pre-sharpening, should you also pre-sharpen if you use Topaz Denoise, since it also sharpens? I use Topaz Denoise when I first export into Photoshop. Yes, you should still pre-sharpen. The thing to be aware of, which is difficult to show on that image, if we're over sharpening our images before we go into Photoshop, or in particular after we're in Photoshop, one of the big issues we're going to run into is it's going to create a whole lot of noise. And then something to keep in mind. And then answered that one. Printer programs for Epson. I think a couple people put stuff in chat. Not sure about that. Otherwise, I can do some research on the Epson monitors as well. So, okay, so a couple more questions will come in, but we can get into the other stuff. All right, so over/under sharpening, went through that. All right, under or over saturating colors is another one to take a look at or consider. So this image here probably could be considered oversaturated. But let's take a look at it. Let's think about it. Let's talk about artistic intent. So this is a print I sell fairly regularly, specifically to emulate a little bit more of the artistic side of the house for me. So I call this print Van Gogh Blur because it brings together a little bit of the Van Gogh Starry Night with Van Gogh irises. It's an actually single image exposure. It's a single image capture. And I've toyed around and played around with the light painted image, what is too much or not too much in terms of saturation, what looks right when I print this image. It looks really saturated on the screen, but when it's printed and hanging on somebody's walls, a 30-inch by 40-inch print, what looks right or doesn't look right. But the answer is, well, I need to use a little bit of that program to figure it out. So this one is one where you'll get the reference sheet later. We can check the gamut warnings. Remember, I talked about gamut as the range of colors and why photo space is important, but also why we get into particular things. So we can pull this image over into, and it's already a JPEG, but over into Photoshop. So we'll pull it over into Photoshop. Let's put it in there on Photoshop. There we go. Okay. So if we go up here to view and we go to gamut warning, it's going to tell me right away what is clipping, what is showing up, what is creating a potential problem within the image. And what the gamut warning is signifying is these are things that are outside of the range of what I could expect to be printed. So what it's telling me is these blues are potentially too saturated, oversaturated, and these yellows out there within, you got to turn it off by clicking it back down again. These yellows are potentially too much out there within the image as well. So I potentially might want to make some adjustments to the image. And so we usually can be able to keep our gamut warning on, and then we can start to make adjustments to the particular adjustment within the image. And so now I'm picking just that within the image. This is going to be using the TK stuff, which is a little more complicated. But as I drag down potentially just that part, maybe I'm going to drag something down kind of like that into the gamut a little bit lower. And then there's a couple different ways you can do this. I usually will put it into a group and then put a mask on top of the group, invert the mask, and now go through with a brush, a white brush on top of this, and kind of paint that portion back in a little bit and see what that looks like. And so maybe I'll take my gamut warning back off. Now you can see that part's not clipping within the image. We can see that detail that's within there. I've masked through that part of it. So that's a helpful thing. So maybe I want to make one more adjustment here. I could do another mask on that part, do another gamut selection on that. But I want to show you just how to do one more part, and then you can fine tune it all the way through. The other solution, or the other option you have, in addition to masking it like that, well, is most likely these are too saturated. So maybe now I want to do a color mask based on the hue, and I want to select that portion of it. So it's going to select a mask just based on those super bright bluish purple flowers, lupine they're called. And then maybe now I'll do a something like a hue saturation adjustment, and I'll desaturate them and see if this works. What kind of effect does this get? So as I'm pulling down, oops, I'm underneath. See, now I'm down underneath my group. I need to pull this back up above my group. What am I doing as I'm desaturating these guys down through here? Well, as I desaturate them all the way down, or most of the way down, I lose that clipping, but I also potentially lose a little bit of my color. So I need to take a look at my lightness or darkness. So as I darken them, well, it brings back a lot of it. Maybe I'll lighten them a little bit. Well, now I'm not clipping it. Let's take a look at what that looks like on the gamut. Yeah, they're still blue. They're still there, but maybe not as much as I want to see. So it's sometimes a little bit of a balance. So maybe I increase my saturation back up a little bit more, not all the way back up, and kind of take a look and see what that looks like as well. So these are the ways you can correct. So go back into that gamut. I'm correcting these things kind of slightly all the way back through. Same thing on the yellows or whatever else. And so this is going to be helpful to be able to check what might clip when we print. The bigger thing we can do oftentimes, what I would do on an image like this, is I would then go back to my raw file and just ramp back down my saturation and make some minor adjustments there. But sometimes we can't. Sometimes we get to that print stage, we got everything the way we want it. Maybe we need to not even go back to our particular raw and just make those adjustments right there. So these are how we can check to see what's actually happening. I showed you earlier about if we're printing an image and it's coming out with not as much saturation, we want to add a little bit of vibrance and contrast. But it is oftentimes an issue we can run into. So if we're not adding that vibrance and contrast as part of the workflow, which I'll demonstrate again, or demonstrate in full, that's a big issue. So keeping that in mind. All right, so last mistake we're going to make, and then we're going to go to take questions, and I'm going to do the start to finish workflow, is dust spots. And so this image here, ton of dust spots. And they're not always dust spots from the standpoint of dust as much as this particular image, which you want to load for me, don't you? There we go. These are rain spots. This is a long exposure f/22, probably could have done less. So we're going to see, as we narrow our aperture, more and more of these dust spots. And so if you're in a situation where things are really wet, you're getting rained on, a more open aperture, you're going to see less of these particular dust spots. But there's something that I've just grown to accept. I don't get stressed about it in the field, and I correct them later. I'm going to show you 2 ways to correct these. Mode number 1 is the spot healing brush. And you hit this little thing down here within Photoshop called Visualize Spots down here at the bottom left. And it will help, and you can see I've already cleaned a bunch of them up. There is a lot in this image. You go through and just collect them, and it's going to pick them out for you within the image. And so it does a fairly good job kind of picking these out within the image and cloning them out. And then when you're done, you just hit the Enter key, and it'll be done out of there. So those have taken care of some of those there. But within Photoshop, there's also a couple ways to do it. And I find Photoshop does a little bit better job. And I do it as a final part of my print process most of the time. But dust spots is even, I showed you on that one print, I missed one on the top left. It's another thing that can drive us absolutely nuts with our images. And I feel like Photoshop has a good way within the TKs to do these. And so the TK module, the Tony Kuiper luminosity masks, if you go into here, you'll see under the TK, there's one called Clean Dust. And what it does is it creates a separate mask which amplifies the dust and desaturates. And so on this layer, it loads a heal clone for you, and you can go through and just select the dust spots as you see them in here. So it's another way to do it. kind of quickly. You can do it. It does a little bit better job, I found, especially on ones where you have a lot of them. Because the thing with Lightroom is it sometimes selects multiple things that'll be close to each other. And so this one will do a good job. And then when you're done, you just delete those 2 layers out. Maybe you go through and see if you missed any, like this one here, maybe one. And that's just all in the Heal Clone. And now we're good to go all the way through. So that's the last thing. So the Heal Clone, removing the dust spots is another issue. All right, final couple things. We still got 30 minutes left. I'll certainly take some more time for questions if we need them because we had a little blip with the power outage. Typical settings, you'll get this information here. The other thing I'll mention is to come learn from the experts. So many of you know or have signed up already for the summer speaker series, The Vision of Black and White. Jennifer King, Hugo Hood, Cole Thompson, Sarah Marino, John Barclay. So we'd certainly love to see you there. We're going to go through a lot of the stuff specific to black and white. They're going to do post-processing demonstrations. We're also going to see informations and image critiques from people that submit their images. Jennifer and Sarah are going to be doing image critiques, which are going to be a lot of fun all the way through. So the other thing, which actually should have been right here, this is another reference sheet you have, is the common settings for most labs, native resolutions. They're able to upscale or downscale as print labs are. And here's a way to calculate the DPI of your image or the PPI of your image. So this will give you a difference. And then here's also a good primer on DPI versus PPI all the way through. All right. No more PowerPoint, which is good, but it helped to guide us through and gives you good reference things to go back to later. I do want to take questions before I do the demonstration of the workflow. So I'm going to make sure I got the Q&A up and take it. Okay, so what is TK? TK is Tony Kuiper. He builds these masks and these plugins for the use in Photoshop that speed up your workflow and help you to build luminosity masks. So if you're not familiar and want to start to learn those, I have a couple different tutorials and classes. Just email me. I'm happy to give you a half-off discount on those because they're really helpful. Gary asked if I use ProPhoto, what print company can use ProPhoto? I'm not aware of any. I think that Nevada Art can use ProPhoto. I'm not sure if they do any conversions as they get all the way through to the tail end, but I think they can. Lawrence asks, is the gamut warning in Photoshop specific to the ICC profile for a specific paper? Ooh, that is a good question. Let's take a look at that. Let's see. So let's see. Edit. Convert to profile. So this is my sRGB profile. Let's go to a different profile. So we're going to go to a Adobe profile. Take a look. So that's the Adobe profile. So it's slightly different than the other. And if we went to, so he's asking about the profile conversions. What if we converted to a paper profile? Japanese color web coded, for example. Yeah, proceed anyways. So that's a different profile that would show what that would look like. And if we do the gamut warning, yeah, it is slightly different. So you can see we lost on that particular paper. We lost the gamut warnings there, and over here we got a little bit of one here. We lost this one, and it changed some of that one right there. So if you are using a specific paper or a specific ICC profile, then you would want to load that. Make sure you load that profile before you do your gamut warning. Good question, Lawrence. I like that one. In the shot on the Milky Way and the trees, flowers, did I perform processing on the Milky Way itself? Yes, I processed this image on both. Both processed it's a single image exposure. I white painted the tree and the flowers. And then, so it's not like any crazy manipulation. This is the actual air glow that was going on within the sky of the mountain. This is here on the Central Coast. So photographing towards the ocean, and then one image on the Milky Way. But yeah, I post-processed the image all the way together. All right. Jerry asks, lots of good questions from Jerry. I appreciate that. What is the impact of the final print if a print company doesn't use ProPhoto? High different than what I can print. I haven't been able to notice enough of a difference, if I'm being honest, between what they print and what they don't. I do have one client who's taken classes from before, and he does test strips. So he'll prepare a print, and you can Google test strips for printing with multiple types of things together, and he can tell the difference on the different printers. But I also know he's very engineering oriented, and I don't quite have the color discrepancy line abilities that a lot of other people have. I'm actually partially colorblind on greens, which is kind of interesting. But I hopefully don't mess it up too much in my prints, and I don't think I do. But that's why I would encourage you to try the test prints from different companies, and you can kind of fine tune as well. And all of them, oftentimes I'll say, 5 or 10 test prints, but if you're working with them and really refining your printing, they're going to give you more test prints usually, so, which is good. Soft profiling for specific paper, helpful in your experience? Yes. Yeah, so you can do the soft profiling. So Lightroom has the soft proofing, where you can load particular profiles into Lightroom right here. I don't have any other display profiles. I don't do it in here, but I do have a oops, I'm sorry, I'm not sharing. Let me share my screen. Share screen. So Lightroom has the soft profiles. So you can soft proof by clicking the button down here, and it'll load in particular soft profiles for you. So you can hit the other, and if you have those things, you can do those in Lightroom right there. And then that proof copy, you can create a copy and see what it would actually look like. So that's the way you can proof within Lightroom. Within Photoshop, there's the proof setups. So you can actually have a custom proof setup right here that'll show your particular thing. So good questions. Okay. Not seeing my screen. Good. See, I caught it not too long after it. All right. So let's take a look at kind of preparing an image for final print. So I'm going to run through the workflow. Let me show you what it looks like. So photography, presentations, technical, no, it's under post-processing, preparing your images for print. Here's the class materials you're going to get. Finding and adjusting oversaturation. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Ordering your print. You'll get the preparing your image for a print workflow, the megapixels as well. So here's the workflow. Let's give it a second to pull up. I lost. Here's what I'm going to run you through kind of all the way through. So you'll get this information on how to do this. There's 2 ways you can sharpen, Smart Sharpen and High Pass. I do have to say High Pass has become the one that I'm recommending. But this is the print workflow that we're going to go through to show you how to prepare the print all the way through, and you'll get a copy of this. So let's look at, go back over into Lightroom. We're going to take a look at this print here. So this is from my trip to Nepal. This is so far probably my favorite image. This is Gokyo Lake. This is Chalotse. Beautiful peaks up there. I love the clouds. I love the textures, everything else. I'm probably going to print this one here pretty soon. See what it looks like all the way through. So let's say this is one that I'm ready to print, which I am. What am I going to do to get it all the way ready to the end? So I'm going to go edit in Photoshop with Lightroom adjustments. And I'll pull up Photoshop. All right. So this is where we come kind of full circle, hopefully. Pulling everything together we've been talking about all the way through. I'm going to, first and foremost, I'm going to determine what size I think I want to print this image as. So I'm going to take a look at it, and sometimes you can read it right here. So actually, and sometimes I'll show you. So within Photoshop, you have your toolbar set up under properties, and it can tell you your canvas size right here. So 27.52 by 18.35. So it's basically a 20 by 30, which holds true the 2:3 ratio within my print. So let's say I don't want to oversize this print. I wanted this printed as a 20 by 30. I probably would resize the print right away. So I come up here to image size and I go 30. And let's see if it automatically populates if they're linked. Yeah, I know, 30. And it does, 30 by 20. So I'm resizing this to a 30 by 20. That preserved details 2.0, not a big change, kind of all the way through. So we've resized the image down the way we want. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the layer. So I'll show you on the workflows. Pre-sharpening, which I already showed, if already in Photoshop, we're going to stamp, we're going to duplicate it. If we're sending it to a printer with a particular color space, we're going to convert to the color space profile and make any adjustments to the color as needed before proceeding. So let's say we're going to do that. Let's say I'm actually going to print it on my printer right here. I don't have the capability to print 20 by 30, but I could go on ahead and convert it into a color space, which is going to be more applicable. So I'm actually going to convert it, sounds kind of weird, into an sRGB. I don't want to be jumping. I'm going to convert it in sRGB because that oftentimes matches the printer closer, and it's also going to be accurate for my particular monitor. So sRGB, do I need to make any color adjustments now? The answer for me is probably no. It still looks pretty good all the way through. Maybe after I print it in a test print, I would want to make some adjustments, but it's not a lot about the colors. It's more about the textures and some of the other things within the image. So I've converted it there. Now I'm going to duplicate the layer. So duplicating it all the way back through and zooming in and out. Now I'm going to convert it into the screen mode, or remember what I showed you to brighten things up. So we're going to convert it into screen, the blending mode into screen. And then we're going to select those pixels. We're going to load the channel as a selection. So this little circle down here under our channel portion. So now I'm targeting the bright pixels within the image. So this mask it's creating a mask on the bright pixels. Oops, excuse me. And now I'm going to go up to select inverse. I want it to select the inverse of that. And then I'll add a vector mask right here, a little circle, little square with a circle on the inside. And now it looks too bright. So I'm going to adjust the fill, screen fill kind of all the way through particular one. So maybe something around there. And then I'm going to add a vibrance layer. Doesn't matter whether you add a vibrance or contrast layer in order. So 10 to 15-ish. Something probably around there. Maybe I'll take a little look and see what that looks like. Before and after. Not making a big change there. Adding a little bit of blue on the outside, which is good. It's not going to be a massive change. It shouldn't be, but it's going to help it when it prints all the way down through. Then I'll add a contrast layer, which is going to be down here under, no, up here under brightness contrast. 10 points of contrast all the way through. Okay, so I've added those two adjustments, and now the next thing I'm going to do is stamp the layer. So this is covered in the workflow. So we've gone through, we've added a brightness contrast, vibrance, stamp it. And then, so stamping it is Command Option Shift E or Windows Alt Shift E on a PC. I don't know why it's doing this export as thing. Sorry. I'm obviously doing something wrong when I look at my keyboard versus just instinctually doing it. 1 second. I don't want to export. I want to just work on my file. There. Yeah. Okay. Next, I'm hitting the W is why. Power going off fried my brain, I think. Windows Alt-G. All right, so now I've stamped that layer. So the next thing I do is I save it as a print file. So the reason I do that, so I have all these print files, all of my different places, all the different things I've done. I save my print file by the year, the month I processed, and then I will save it as, the file name, Splendor print file. And why do I do this? Why should you consider doing this? So oftentimes what happens is we will need to print. If you're printing your work for more than just yourself, or even if you are printing for yourself, you're going to want it in different sizes and variations. And so rather than going through all these steps, I now have my base print file. So if I need to print this in a different size, a 16 by 20 or something else, I have what I need already ready to go. So then I can go in and open up this file, resize it to whatever I want, and then go from there. So I always save it there, and then I save it into luminosity mode, which means any other adjustments I make are just going to be impacting the lightness or the brightness, not any of the contrast within the image. So now I have my master print file. And so I will have that saved, and any changes or modifications I will make, I'll do later. So let's say, the reason I say that, so I'm going to exit out of here, and I'm going to run through like the scenario, how we go to that place. So now we've got our master print file, and I would open that up, and wherever I keep all my master files. And so I have my master print files here. I have my one for the mountain here, a Splendor print file. I'll open that up. It's going to pull it into Photoshop because I just got an order. Somebody loved the print, my friend Sam, but he wants it as a 16 by 20. So I haven't sharpened this image. I haven't done any of the other modifications or whatever else. And so now I have a base file that I can now sharpen. So now I'm going to do it. So he wants it as a 16 by 20. So now we're going to go into the crop, C for crop, 4 by 10. And we're going to basically resize the image to some degree and based on what a 16 by 20 would look like. So 16 by 20 like this, I still have the mountain kind of following the rule of thirds. It's got the lake the way I want it all the way through. So I'm going to do it that as a baseline image there. Then I'm going to go through. I don't have to make any of the brightness, vibrance, other adjustments. I've gotten the image the way I want it. Now I will size the image to exactly be what I want. So I want it to be a 20 by 16. So it's automatically going to be a 20 by 16. So it's going to resize that image to exactly the print specifications that I want. Now I will add my signature. So I hit the little C copyright thing over here, and it's going to apply my signature exactly where I want it. So if I wanted it to be larger or smaller or in a different position, it's going to put that all the way through. Some of you that don't have TK, they don't have all that bells and whistles set up, which is fine. You can still add your signature manually. You just go into where you keep your signatures. I keep mine under sales and marketing. I have them under, it takes me a quick second to remember where I put these things. Collateral, business cards, logos, my photography logo. And so I can figure out which one I want, and I want a white high res. And you can actually just take it from wherever you're in and drag it in and drop it. So if you don't have it set up that way, you can just drag in whatever kind of logo or whatever else or text, and then you can manually resize it to what and where you want it. So down here, I usually like the bottom right corner. I'm going to get it where I want it, hit the enter key. I have my logo right there. Okay, so now I've done that portion. I have the logo, I've resized the image, I have it where I want it. Now I need to sharpen it. So sharpening, once again, we'll actually just, in this case, flatten the image, duplicate the layer. And this is that creating a smart object or converting to smart object. Then I will change the blending load. This is covered in your workflow to soft light. And then I'll go to filter, other, high pass. And I'm going to pull up and I'm going to look around the image, making sure I'm not getting any haloing. or other issues. I'm at a 4.2 pixel. I'm looking around the edges. I'm not seeing any haloing there. If I zoom in, am I seeing any artifacting? I'm at 100 and something percent. No, I'm looking pretty good there. So now I would just either choose to adjust it down a little bit more or keep it where it is. I'll probably just keep it around 4 megapixels or 4 pixels and hit OK. So now I've done that. I've put my stamp on there. I've sized the image to a 16 by 20. Then I go up to File, Save a Copy. And this is why we're not going to edit our original at all. And we want to save this now as a JPEG. And I have all of my processed images are saved in a different place. And so I have my 16 by 20s. And so I would save it in here. I would embed the color profile because I've changed it to an sRGB color profile already into the particular one. And I would save it. So 16 by 20. And I can actually name it if I want, 16 by 20. Splendor 16 by 20, whatever I want. And then when I hit save, it's going to pull up a dialog box to ask me if I want it to be a large file or a big file. And I want it to be as large of a file as possible because I've already sized it correctly. And then it's a baseline optimized. So then I hit baseline optimized. And I now have saved the JPEG of the file and it's ready to go to the printer. So that's the full kind of preparing the image once you've done all your editing to get it to final print and be able to send it off. And so this is all covered in here. So save as JPEG, quality 12, baseline optimized. This is the high pass recommendation. I'm actually going to delete off the Smart Sharpen because I've actually not seen it been working as well. So you won't even get that. You'll just get the sharpening high pass recommendation. Okay. So little disjointed in terms of the interruption. So hopefully I didn't throw people off too much. Once again, you'll get the free Topaz Nik collection thing as a thank you. Also want to reiterate again, if it was too disrupting, when I teach the class again, you can come back for free, or you can also just ask for your money back. You'd still get all the class materials, which is good. But I'll answer some more questions as well as we go through. And if you have any last minute questions in the last 10 minutes, feel free to drop them in there and we'll answer them. So, okay, let's go through these. All right, what does stamping the layer mean? So stamping the layer means, I'm going to stop the share. That's not what it means, but I'm going to stop the share anyways. So stamping the layer means you're taking, basically freezing everything that's down below that into one particular layer. So you're collapsing down the file size. And so when you get to a point in time where you want to make your file a little smaller, or you want to be able to not, everything you've done below that is good, you can just stamp the layer together and it's collapsing the file down into just that there. So if you make a bunch of changes and modifications you think you might want to go back to, you don't want to stamp the layer, because once you stamp that layer, all of the tweaks, you can go back. You can't go back and make any changes or modifications in the layers below. So when I stamp a layer, it's basically saying I'm good with what I have. I don't need to go back. You can always delete an unstamped layer. So an unstamped file, unstamped layer, and go back and make changes. So if you stamp a layer, then you realize, oh, geez, I need to brighten this up or do whatever else. You can go back and do that. So, and I think you asked. No, it's not the same as flattening. So if we look at this, I'm going to, of course, as soon as I stop the share, I'm going to go Command Shift S. Come on. Oh no, it's in Photoshop. I don't want to do that. All right, so let me just show this again. Sorry. Zoom. There we go. So it's different. So this here, I'll just look at too many windows open, of course. This is do I not have this one here? Let me find one that's not stamped. Okay, I can show you on this one actually. So if you stamp the layer, Windows Alt Shift E, then everything is down below it, it's still kept. And so I can still delete that layer and go back and make tweaks and modifications. If you flatten a layer, all the layers that are down below it are now gone. So you can't go back and undo or make any changes or modifications. So it varies on what you want, but just keep that in mind all the way through. So very valid question. Okay. And Bill asks, do I use this method to do my own prints versus sending them out? I use this method for both. I will do all of my sharpening and my everything else all the way through, regardless of if I'm doing it or somebody else is doing it. The only difference I have is the printer I use, they will take 16-bit TIFFs. So then I won't have to do the export as JPEG for them. I just give them my TIFF file, my flattened TIFF file. So they can go in if they need to make any last minute changes, like, oh, we need to brighten this up based on our printer or whatever, they can do that. And then they have my master files as well. So then when I need another print order, I just drop them an email. Hey, I got 3 more prints of this or that. It's good. So Gary asks, when you print your images, do I convert to JPEG or keep it as TIFF in ProPhoto? I have to convert to JPEG to print on my Canon. It won't let me print as a TIFF. So I have to print directly out of that. If I'm printing as a ProPhoto TIFF or ProPhoto JPEG, the printer seems to make whatever adjustments based on its gamut. So we have the gamut of what our devices display. There's also a gamut of what the printer can display. So it'll make those changes or adjustments. Yep. People said, I appreciate the information, lots of it. Thanks. Help with the slides and other information. Yeah, it's designed to have something you can go back to and reference. Some of this stuff, different things stick in for different people at different parts of their journey. But definitely keep in mind that you can go back and review the materials. You can also come back and ask me questions. I've worked with people in depth, like full mentorship, but I've also worked with people on, hey, I just got this back from the printer and this is the issue, what's going on? And I'm happy to answer those kind of questions for free, not by making any money or whatever else. I just want you to be able to print your stuff all the way through. The other thing I would say is on this, I have a calendar one I did, preparing your images for calendar, that I can send you as well. There's another one. So if you're going to prepare images for a calendar, I'll give you that one for free. So. And Brian says, at UPS, uninterruptible power supply helps with power outages. Yes, it would have, except for the fact that my Wi-Fi is not on the UPS. But so I guess now I need to go get that solar battery backup system. So certainly be happy to go get one of those. But we'll see. Okay, well, I'm glad people learn stuff, going with the flow. I appreciate everybody else going with the flow as well. It's a first. I think I've taught over 500 Zooms and Camera Club presentations, and that's the first time I've lost power for any one of them. So I don't want to repeat again, but maybe I will. So, which is great. Well, feel free to ask any last minute questions. We're coming right up on time. I will send the recording out tomorrow. I'm not sure if we're going to have that first 30 minutes. I'm probably not. I think it's going to get lost, but you'll have the last little bit, and then feel free to come back at questions as well. So, but I appreciate your guys' patience. Oh, here we go. What's the advantages of ProPrint program versus Lightroom printing for home printing? I'm not sure about the ProPrint. So the printing at home. So the Canon Print Studio Pro is a free program. It comes with their printer. And so that's something you can get for free. Lightroom printing, you can print out of Lightroom. It does a little bit better job than Photoshop. Photoshop does a horrible job. But what is Print Studio Pro? Here, I'll show you what it looks like. So it's under Automate. Of course, it's not in here now, actually. So I'll pull it up in Lightroom. So let me show you what Print Studio Pro looks like and what it does. Plug-in extras, Print Studio Pro. So it should pull up this window for you. Oh shoot, it's not working on this computer because I just upgraded to Ventura. I'm printing off my laptop. But what it does is it pulls up the thing that lets you select your paper types and lets you select the profile, and then it matches to the profile right there. Versus if you're printing just out of Lightroom, you're not going to have as much of a profile match with the printer, and it's not going to be custom configured. So Print Studio Pro is free. It comes with the Canon software portion. So And then, do I recommend using TK? Yes, I love TK. And the thing it does is it really speeds up my workflow. And so when I showed you to do the selecting the lights and inverting the mask and adjusting the screens, I can do that in one click in TK. I can do all of these other shortcuts in TK that really speed things up. So I really recommend the program. It does really good things on building masks, doing targeted selections. Mike is saying, yeah, Lumensy has another option similar to TK. It's a great program as well. Greg Benz does that one. TK is from Tony Kuiper. So both good programs, both simpler than Raya Pro. And if you want more information on the luminosity masks, I have a pretty in-depth class on that. I can send you a code for 50% off to watch those. I want people to understand how to use them because they help your work for sure. All right. What's the issue with Photoshop printing? Last question of the night. It doesn't do the right job of scaling to the actual specific printer paper like you can do, and you can't adjust margins. It's just really, really clunky. I've never gotten it to work right, honestly. Versus the Print Studio Pro, I can adjust my margins on the printer, what if I want for white space or not. I can adjust my printer paper, and then it communicates to the printer really, really well. I've yet to get Photoshop. I keep trying. I've yet to get it to work. The Print Studio Pro works well, so great. All right, well, I'm going to sign off for now. I'm going to go eat some dinner and go from there. But I will send the stuff out to you tomorrow. And thanks once again for the patience, and glad to have you. So thanks so much. I'll see you again.